And the purpose is to inspire wealth sharing, or what we might call the major gifts of assets. So just as a reminder from earlier, this is the missing piece in our churches, that we don't get these wealth sharing gifts, that churches look different than other organizations because we don't get these wealth sharing gifts. And even in the estate plans, the same thing. We're not getting those big gifts. We're getting small gifts from wealthy donors, but not the major life investment gifts. So we're looking at this missing ministry of major gifts fundraising, which we've already talked about how this is reaching out as a scriptural ministry to the wealth holders. This is not everybody in the church. This is the wealth holders. And so we already talked about a little bit about some of the scriptural background of all of this. But the thing to keep in mind is that if we are going to get donors to think about wealth sharing, we need to talk about wealth sharing stories. And wealth is not money. Wealth is appreciated assets. Wealth sharing is not money sharing. It's asset sharing. So take a look at this. This is from census data, and it shows the financial assets held by families. Now, this excludes real estate. It excludes the house and any real estate investments. Just the financial assets held by families, only 1% to 3% is held in cash. Checking accounts, saving accounts, money market deposit accounts, and similar. When you're asking for cash, when you're not having asset conversations, you're asking from the small bucket, the tiny disposable income checking account bucket. We need to have wealth sharing conversations, which means we need to have these asset conversations because that's where the wealth is held. And as I mentioned, we did the study to show, hey, if you want biblical justification, it's there. If you want the justification from the research, it's there. We looked at that just a bit ago. We looked at the stewardship issues and why this is a separate stewardship issue. This is not about the binging bad steward. It is about the burying bad steward and how to help people keep them from doing that. And that's what we see in Scripture. These are not donor stories. These are asset donor stories. This is wealth sharing, and this is what our example in the New Testament is wealth sharing, asset donor stories. That's what Scripture says. I got to tell you, many of you know me very well. Good friends, thank you for coming. And you know that I give presentations on major gifts of assets, sometimes called planned giving, across the country. We have national organizations, we have local organizations, and when I give those presentations, there are fundraisers from every kind of nonprofit, except one. There are no churches, there are no stewardship ministers, there are no executive pastors. It's missing from the church, even though it's not missing from the explicit examples and explicit directions of Scripture. I know the feeling. I'm afraid. I'm not comfortable talking to wealth holders about their wealth. I don't know anything about wealth or wealth management or assets. I don't know about capital gains taxes and closely held stock and real estate trusts and private foundations and charitable remainder trust, charitable lead trust, or estate planning. I don't want to have these conversations. Look, learning new things is required for reaching out to any new people group. We're not called only to minister to those who are like us. It's a scriptural ministry, and it's missing. And the economic and spiritual consequences of that missing ministry can be devastating. I'm just going to tell you, you can fix this. You can embrace this missing ministry. If you're looking at this saying that, oh, well, I don't know about capital gains taxes, closely held stock, all that sort of thing. You know what it sounds like to me? It's like somebody saying, oh, a ministry to prisoners, I don't know anything about their life. They probably want to talk about, tattoos and gangs and stabbings and stuff, and I don't know anything about that. We're not called only to minister to those who are like us. We're called to, in many cases, minister to those who are very much not like us. And that means we got to learn stuff, right? If somebody says, you're going to go to this new country and minister there, I'm going to have to learn some stuff, okay? It's the same idea. You're going to have to learn some stuff that applies just to this people group. It's not an excuse to say, well, I don't want to learn about prison life. I'm never going to prison. It's not an excuse to say, I don't need to learn about wealth management. I'm not going to be wealthy. No. That's the people group that you're ministering to. And I point out that if you say, I don't know anything about wealth management, assets, capital gains taxes, closely held stock, real estate, trust, private foundation, all that sort of thing. Hey, I tell you what, you can learn about that stuff, and it's free, and I put it all together, and you can access it either on YouTube. You can go to encouragegenerosity.com. The free links are there. 15-minute videos. If you suffer through just one of them a day, give it 2 or 3 months, you'll know a lot about this whole area. You can fix this. You can embrace this ministry. Here's the thing. We want to have these wealth conversations because the secret to fundraising math is gifts of wealth, not disposable income. Major gifts are gifts of wealth. As I mentioned before, wealth is not income. Wealth doesn't come from a paycheck. It comes from owning assets that go up in value. People buy assets with inheritance, borrowings, or savings from income, and then they pick the right asset or they use personal effort to increase the asset value. That's how wealth is built, whether it's Bill Gates or Warren Buffett or your neighbor. Wealth comes from owning assets that go up in value. You either pick the right assets, that's risk, or you use personal effort to increase asset value. Bill Gates, he used personal effort to build up his company, Microsoft. Or Warren Buffett, he invented a new way to borrow money to buy stocks, and then he bought the right stocks. Most middle-class wealth, it's from people who borrow money to buy an appreciated asset. We call it a house, a mortgage to buy a house, and that is where most middle-class wealth is held. The point is that we need to be having asset conversations because that's where wealth is. I've already given you the answer on this one. Wealth is a different money category. Gift size is relative to the money category. Asking for cash is asking from the small bucket. Asking for appreciated assets is asking from the big bucket. Money categories change behavior. This was a fun experiment. People walking into a grocery store, hey, do you want to participate in this experiment, get a free candy bar? Sure. Some of them were asked about what's in your wallet or purse. Do you have any cash? Do you have any credit cards? Others were asked, do you own any stocks, any bonds, any certificates of deposit? Just being asked that question immediately changed their behavior. They started feeling wealthier. They actually spent more, 36% more on average, on the subsequent shopping trip. Well, the impact for charitable giving is even greater. A small ask from a small category works. A big ask from a small category does not work. If we want major life investment gifts, we need to have these conversations about assets. Think of it this way. Which gift is more valuable? A $10,000 check or $10,000 of stock shares? Now, you might talk to your CFO who says, oh, we want the check, that's less hassle. But in fact, one gift is far more valuable, not just because it's beneficial to the donor, because they can avoid capital gains taxes, but because of mental accounting. The checking account, that's where disposable income lives. The stock portfolio, that's wealth sharing. And that is mentally a different kind of gift. In math, a dollar is a dollar. In story, people put labels on money and then they treat those dollars differently based upon those labels. When a new category of wealth or income becomes donation relevant, donations go up. Look, you can think about it this way. Think about the first time you ever, let's say, made a gift of furniture or clothes to a charity shop. From that point forward, the next time you're moving or redecorating, what comes to mind? Oh yeah, there's a charity option there. In the same way, the first time a donor makes a gift of an appreciated asset and realizes, oh, I didn't have to pay any capital gains taxes. I completely avoided all of those. What's going to come to mind the next time that that donor is facing a sale where they're going to have to pay a lot of capital gains taxes? Again, it's the same notion that, oh, there's a charitable option for that. So we want to start by listening. Maybe it's an upcoming sale or retirement or inheritance. Those are all great times for charitable planning. I'm there. I help our donors give smarter. That's my job description, right? How do you do that? You share a story about how you have helped somebody or another person has helped somebody to make a big impact by making a gift of an asset that made a difference. You can have donor stories. They can include stocks, bonds, real estate, or businesses because mindset matters. Gifts from disposable income stay small. Once a donor begins to think of their donations as something that comes from wealth, things can change. Now, I want to give you a little bit different of a story here. We've been talking about story. Here, what matters is actually what is the setting of the story that you're talking about. Is this the land of wealth sharing? You see, that's a different setting. Oftentimes I talk about the donor's story or advancing the donor's hero story, but for major life investment gifts, we need the right setting. In story, setting creates expectations. Are we in a fantasy realm? Then we're open to fantasy events. Are we in the Old West? We expect Old West things. In fundraising, setting matters. Typical gifts are gifts of disposable income. Major gifts are wealth-sharing gifts. Getting donors to talk about their wealth, their businesses or investments can encourage generosity, can reveal capacity, can reveal plans to buy or sell, acquire or retire. All of those things create opportunities for creative solutions. So in story terms, when I'm not allowed to speak about Scripture, which is 90% of my life because I am a government employee of the state of Texas, when I'm not allowed to talk about Scripture, I talk about the guiding sage character in the universal hero story. This is, again, comes alongside with an authorized message. That's the scriptural language. What does the guiding sage do in those stories, like Obi-Wan Kenobi or Morpheus in the Matrix or Gandalf the Grey in The Hobbit? The guiding sage gives advice, planning, guidance, introduces the prospective hero to friends and allies, provides a magical instrument or weapon. This is the same role that we can fulfill as a fundraiser. We can give advice, planning, guidance. We can introduce that prospective hero to friends and allies, technical experts, past donors. And we can even provide a magical instrument or weapon. Maybe it's a gift instrument or an agreement. This is the role scripturally of the authorized advisor, to come alongside Angele with that authorized message. That's the story character role. Now, the Socratic inquiry reveals what fits each donor's specific journey. But for major gifts, the guiding sage fundraiser needs to talk about assets. We know all the reasons why. It creates a setting of wealth sharing. It uncovers capacity for a major gift. It reveals opportunities for creative solutions. And it can lead to the next meeting that shares some of those creative options. And believe me, whatever your scenario is, you've heard the phrase, there's an app for that. Hey, there's a gift planning strategy for that, right? If the donor is planning to sell an appreciated asset, not planning to sell appreciated stocks, is getting ready to retire, is taking retirement account distributions, maybe they have a big income spike, maybe they can't even use tax deductions, maybe they have kids who don't want to take over the farm or the vacation home, maybe they've got estate tax issues, maybe they have wealth tied up in illiquid assets. For every scenario, there is a gift planning option for that. All of these things appear if we can start having wealth conversations with donors. And here's the important thing, that ultimately what we're wanting to get to is to lead to the next meeting that can share some of those creative options. So how do we do this? How do we start these conversations? One of the things we know from research is that social emotional language encourages sharing. Social phrases elicit more information. People are more forthcoming when you ask questions in a casual way rather than a buttoned up or official tone. How do we start these conversations? Doesn't have to be rocket science. Hey, how's business? How's the market been treating you, especially these last couple of weeks? The magic actually comes from the follow-up questions. These show shared interests and reveal opportunities to provide advice. What's the story we're trying to elicit here? The story we want to elicit is the past, present, and future story of the asset. Assets have stories. They have a past. or the origins of the asset. They have a present, what's happening now, and they have a future plans for the asset. If you go through this past, present, and future asset story conversation, it leads to opportunities for charitable impact, for charitable planning. What does this actually sound like when we do that? Let's give an example of a business. Let's start with the past. So, what's the story of your business? How did you get started? Then we move to the present. What are you most excited about at the current time? Ultimately, we move through this to get to the future. You see, the future is the fundraising punchline because there's only two answers to the question of what are your plans for your business. You're either going to sell it or you're going to die with it. And both of those are great opportunities for charitable conversations. So, for example, what are your future plans for your business? What will that mean to you? Have you thought about using the sale or transition of your business as an opportunity to achieve some of your charitable goals in addition to your financial goals? Maybe they're not planning to sell it. They're planning to die with it. Will your heirs continue running the business? Hey, I know there are some smart ways to avoid taxes for people like you who want to include a gift to charity in their plans. Have you ever considered that? Now, notice that the end of the past, present, future asset story matches the start of our scriptural conversation. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, wealth conversations start with, "For we have brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either." Moving us towards that core wealth message. What is our core message from Scripture? Don't bury it and die with it. That's foolish. Instead, enjoy it by using it to do good, by being rich in beautiful good works. So we are going through this process to get to the beginning stage of what are you planning to do with this asset? Now, I gave you the example of assets where we were having a conversation about a business. You can do the same thing with any other kind of asset. Oh, are you a collector? If it's art, stamps, coins, etc. What's the story? How did you get started? Do you invest in real estate? Tell me how you got started. Where do you vacation? Do you own a home there? If so, we've got an asset. Let's elicit the asset story from that. How's the market been treating you? What's your investment philosophy? What's the best investment you ever made? Tell me that story. Ultimately, we are moving from the past to the present to the charitable future. Have you considered making gifts with assets instead of cash? Or many donors giving at your level use appreciated assets instead of cash because they get a double tax benefit. Have you ever considered giving in that way? We can also approach it not by asking the why questions that we dealt with in the last session to uncover the connections with the donor's people's values and life story, but to ask the how question. You've done so much for this organization. What allows you to be so generous? Or how are you able to make this wonderful gift? You see, if we start that how conversation, we can then ask, hey, have you ever given something other than cash to a charitable organization? If you're ever planning to sell something that's worth more than you paid for it, there are really great charitable opportunities there. Another way that you can start this conversation is not with a question, but with a reverse question. What is a reverse question? That's when you make a statement that's going to cause the other person to ask a question. For example, somebody says, oh, what do you do at the organization? I help our donors give smarter. Can't resist. What do you mean by that? How do you do that? Or if you really want a question that people can't resist, oh, what do you do at the organization? I help people give weird assets to the organization. Can you resist? All right. So what's the weirdest asset someone has given? Why do we make these statements to elicit the question? Because if the other person asks a question, we've got permission to share a story. And you know what that story is going to do? That story is going to be where your advice, or if you haven't done this, you can talk about someone else's situation. Your advice helps someone like the donor. That person in your story is going to give an asset instead of cash. What are you doing? You're telling a donor story, but more particularly, you're telling an asset donor story. That's the scriptural model. And then it's going to end with a question. So, for example, have you ever made any unusual investments? Or have you ever been hit with capital gains taxes? Now, so the first question would be if somebody says, what's the weirdest asset someone has given? Or the second question, if they say, how do you do that? Well, you're going to share a story about how they gave an appreciated asset and they avoided capital gains tax and still got the tax deduction for that. And then you're going to end with, have you ever been hit with capital gains taxes? And then it's all about the follow-up, right? Let's say we end with, have you ever made any unusual investments? Suppose they say yes. What do? Ask about it. Has it gone up in value? Tell me about that. What if they say no? Ask about it. So, do you like stocks or bonds or something else? Or, for example, if we say, have you ever been hit with capital gains taxes? What if they say yes? Ask about it. Oh, that must mean you were good at investing. Tell me what happened. Or if they say no, ask about it. That's smart. It's good to avoid those as long as you can. Do you think it might be a problem in the future? Okay, so again, I'm interested in which of these, because I know for some people this is really frightening to talk about assets, to talk about somebody else's assets. Which of these could you see yourself actually saying? And again, just a quick vote. You can vote for more than one. How many folks would feel comfortable doing the first set? How's business? What's the story of your business? Okay, yeah, we can do that, right? That's not crazy. What about, are you a collector? What's the story? How did you get started? Okay, I like that. How's the market been treating you? Anybody with that one? Okay, smaller groups usually for that one. How about if you've done so much for the organization, what allows you to be so generous? Okay, some people like that. How about starting with the, I help donors give smarter? How do you do that? Okay. And does anybody like the, I help people give weird assets to the charity? Okay, so got some takers on that one. That's great. That's great. One thing that can also happen from this conversation is that they can signal that they don't own any appreciated assets. That's helpful information as well. Wealth is almost never held just as cash. If they don't have appreciated assets, they're probably not in the people group of the wealth holders. And if we're engaged in a ministry to the wealth holders, to the rich, this is saying, okay, wonderful, good to know, this is not in the people group for this specific ministry. Here's something that's important. We have many paths to start these conversations. They actually all have the same destination. What is that destination? It is the meeting to share options. What might that sound like? This reminds me of another donor situation. I remember that she used some creative planning that avoided taxes, created income, provided for family, and made a big impact at the charity. Would you mind if I talk to some of our experts to put together a few ideas for you to look at? That's the destination. Let me talk a little bit more about that. I understand that for many people, even many fundraisers, these conversations feel uncomfortable. Why? They require talking about wealth. The first thing that maybe to help you kind of de-stress the conversation is to think of the goal as social, not as financial. What do I mean by that? Well, let's see. Suppose I told you 4 weeks from today, there's going to be a Star Trek convention in town. And your job is to go to that convention and build relationships with people there. How might you get ready for that? Maybe you want to learn a little bit about Star Trek. You don't say, I don't like Star Trek. No. It's what the other person cares about. You see, for wealth holders, building and managing wealth is an enormous part of their lives. We talk about what the other person cares about. And here's what's also important. Having the right destination in mind. As a fundraiser, the right destination is to share valuable options at the next meeting. Now, fundraisers often fear financial conversations because they have the wrong destination in mind. What do I mean by that? Well, I don't want to start talking about assets. They're probably going to ask me some technical question that I don't even know what the words mean when they ask that to me. And you're not there to pass a final exam on the fly, right? You're not there to pass some CPA exam. You're not even there to instantly give the right answers. Even if you know the right answers, you're not there to give those right answers immediately. What are you there to do? To get permission to share valuable options at the next meeting. You see, if you have that as your goal, then suppose you're having a conversation and what's going on with your life and the asset, and then you get some really technical question and you have no idea even what the words are that are being used. That is wonderful, because that is a perfect reason why we need to set up a time. I'll talk with some of our experts, put together some options for you to look at, but I'm pretty sure other people who have been in your situation, they've actually found some really cool ways that they can use that situation to make a really big impact. The idea is that if I get a question I don't understand, that I'm going to use that as motivation to, we should really get together after I have some time to talk with some of our experts and put together some ideas for you to look at. Would you be willing to do that? Because here's the thing. Once you get agreement on that, now you can be very blunt. Now, okay, so you mentioned, let me make sure I get that down. What was that, the question you had, and the asset? When did you buy it, and how much did you pay for it, and about how much do you think it's worth now? You see, you can be really straightforward at that point, because why? We've agreed on a task. And since we've got agreement on the task, now I can be very straightforward with the questions. This is the goal. Here's another example of it. You remind me of another donor. He was in a similar situation. I remember he used some creative planning. It avoided taxes and helped to make a big impact. Would you mind if I put together some ideas for you to look at? Notice the phrasing that we're using here. People like the donor have done things like this before. You remind me of another donor. He was in a similar situation. We're going to lead with value, creative planning, avoided taxes, big impact. We're going to ask for permission to share even more value, put together some ideas for you to look at. So notice our framing is providing value. Remember what we're trying to do here. We're trying to provide value. We're trying to show here's how you can get enjoyment out of your wealth. God gave you that wealth, and He gave you that wealth, or the ability to produce that wealth. He gave you that for a reason. Why? For enjoyment. Let me show you how you can really enjoy that wealth. That's the helpful role that we're trying to play in this process. Now, one of the reasons that even if you know the right answer, we don't want to be quick with the right answer, is that if you quickly give the right answer in an offhanded way for some charitable planning solution, the donor is not going to perceive that as being valuable. There is power in the delay, power in trying to have the goal of getting permission to share options at the next meeting. Because here's the thing. It helps de-stress the fundraiser, because if you understand that your goal is to get permission to share valuable options at the next meeting, then you know you're going to have several weeks, a couple of weeks at least, to be able to pick up the phone, to call other folks who are in this room, or send a text to Professor James and say, what in the world do I do? This donor has this weird asset. Okay, whatever it is, you'll have time to build that out. You don't have to be instant with the right answers. You can have wealth conversations, asset conversations, and feel super comfortable about it, because an obscure question is a motivation to say, hey, we need to get together after I talk with some of our experts, put together all these plans. Notice what other things this does. This keeps the initial conversation social. It separates it from any financial ask. We're just talking about their lives, talking about their investments, what's going on. It also gives you time to build those creative options, and it makes those options feel more valuable. You see, the idea is if we quickly give the offhanded right answer, it's not going to feel that valuable. But if we set up that time to share these options, these asset-giving options at a later time, it's going to give the donor time to think. It moves the donor's mindset into the land of wealth sharing. Because in that intervening couple of weeks, what's the donor going to be thinking about? Going to be thinking about their asset, going to be thinking about charitable goals. Thinking about their asset, thinking about charitable goals. That is the story setting that we want. That is this land of wealth sharing. And when you come to that next meeting, your story character role is to present that perfect weapon or instrument of impact that helps them to complete that journey, to make that impact. It's going to be an epic scene. An epic scene requires a little bit of buildup, so we don't want to do that instantly. It's great to have expertise because it can help us to spot issues, but it can hurt if we're instantly giving the right answer. What we want to do is we want to get permission to share valuable options at the next meeting. So if we get some hyper-technical question, that's fine. Hey, I want to talk with some of my technical folks first. That way, you'll get all the best options. But I know there are some attractive possibilities here. So the idea is that those kinds of technical questions, we're not afraid of them. We welcome them as a motivation to get that next meeting. What if things don't work out? You get the next meeting, you think you see an opportunity, but later you find out there isn't a solution. Oh, this isn't a good asset. Oh, I don't think there's going to be a great option here. Well, if you get the next meeting, you can still present other powerful options. Well, it turns out that this asset you were talking about, here's the problems that we have with that one. But here's an example of what we could do with another appreciated asset and how we could use that so we can present other valuable options. Here's the other thing. Let's suppose that you get permission for that next meeting, and you're now going to present some valuable options on what the donor could do with this asset. That the donor could do this, or maybe use this kind of a gift agreement, or this kind of an instrument. And you know what? The donor says no. You've actually accomplished some really important things just by having that meeting. Number one, of course, you have accomplished establishing your story character role. Your story character is no longer one of just ask, ask, ask. You are instead coming alongside to provide some valuable options. Here's some different ideas. Here's some different options. That changes the relationship because it changes that story character role. And here's the other thing. If you present an asset-giving option, an asset-giving opportunity for that donor, and they say no, we need to keep in mind that setting is not just a place, which is the land of wealth sharing, it's also a time. And right now may not be the best time for the donor. It may not be today. It may not be the right time, but the donor has learned. They've learned about asset giving. They've learned about the special opportunities for asset giving. And when that time changes, things can happen. Maybe an investment or business is about to be sold. Maybe they're planning for their end of life or estate planning. Maybe a new project at the organization arises. Asking about gifts of assets have laid the groundwork for those future events. There's other ways we can do this. We can use a gift menu in a conversation. So what does this sound like? Well, I help donors like you to give smarter. Usually this involves gifts of stocks, real estate, businesses, life insurance, or retirement accounts. The tax benefits can be much larger. What options would you be interested in knowing more about? Or have you ever considered other types of gifts like these? The idea is we can conversationally just start giving examples of all these different kinds of asset gifts and asking about, hey, have you ever considered giving these types of gifts? What options would you be interested in knowing more about? Again, the idea that we were seeing earlier in Scripture, we have 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5 different words all about asset gifts, lots of different examples. Now, of course, we can do this on not just a conversation, we could also do this as using a menu in a survey, a response card, or a website. Hey, if you want to check the box or click to receive information about how to save taxes with gifts of stocks or bonds, top tax tips for gifts of real estate, tax-smart giving from a retirement account, giving smarter with closely held businesses, how to avoid estate taxes with charitable planning. The point is, if somebody checks that box, they're telling you two things. One, I have this asset. Two, I'm thinking about doing something charitable with it. That's a person you want to have a conversation with. You want to have an asset-giving conversation with. So we can use a menu in your asset-giving donor stories. We can tell stories of asset that have a variety of assets in our donor stories. Just constantly setting that social norm of wealth sharing, of asset sharing. There's another approach that we can take. We can just ask for opinions. How do we ask for opinions? Well, we've got to justify asking the question first. We ask for permission to ask the question, and then we ask for opinions. What might this sound like? First, we justify it. We've noticed that other charities receive more of their gifts from stocks and real estate, and we're trying to figure out why. Do you mind if I ask a few questions about your thoughts on this? If we get permission, then we can ask for opinions. Hey, what's the likelihood you would ever consider making a gift of stocks or bonds, a gift of real estate, a gift in a will, a gift of cryptocurrency, artwork, or oil rights? Or what have you heard about the extra tax benefits from donating assets instead of cash? So again, what are we doing? We're having an asset conversation. We're having a wealth conversation by simply starting with asking for opinions. Now, this has all been about how we begin the conversation to talk about assets to eventually lead to a gift. What if you've already got the gift? Actually, you can even change the setting of the story after the gift decision. This is a story that Chiri and Koshi shared. He said, I had a donor on the phone. He said, I'm going to send you a check for $2,000. I said, Jim, is there any chance that you have stock that's worth $2,000? He said, yes, absolutely, but I don't want to sell that stock. I said, take the cash, go buy that exact same stock, then send us the old shares worth $2,000. Now you have stepped up basis. That highly appreciated stock now starts at zero for capital gains tax purposes, and you get a charitable deduction as well. He asked, I can do that? I said, yeah. The next day, we received a stock gift, not of $2,000, but of $10,000 from the donor. Notice, he didn't ask for a gift of a different size. He asked for a gift of a different type. You see, when you are asking for a gift from wealth, it changes the reference point. You see, if I'm giving you cash, I'm going to compare that to the other things I use cash for, what I just spent at Starbucks or 7-Eleven. If I'm taking that gift out of my stock portfolio, what's my reference point? My stock portfolio, my wealth. And all of a sudden, when I was coming out of my checking account, that $2,000 gift, that's a good gift, right? It's coming out of my stock portfolio. Like, yeah, I could do. I'm reminded of my wealth. I could do more than that. Let's make that $10,000. So notice when we change that reference point, we can change the size of the gift, even without, in this case, even asking for a bigger gift. There's some other examples of this. We can change the setting after the estate gift decision. Hey, if you plan to leave something to charity in your estate plan, could I share with you a way to make sure that the best assets are used for the gift to minimize the loss in taxes? Or we can even change that setting to the land of wealth sharing after the pledge decision. Hey, I can't thank you enough for this tremendous commitment to our charity. When I come back to finalize the details of how you want to allocate the gift, I'll bring a colleague who specializes in putting together gifts to maximize the tax benefits for you. Now, I want to make sure to leave a little bit of time here at the end for be thinking about it. We have comments, questions, snide remarks, calls to burn the heretic, whatever comes to mind at the end. But as we end this section, I want to recognize that there is a difference between having the head knowledge and actually doing it. The idea makes sense, but it can be scary. Having wealth conversations with wealth holders about their wealth can be scary. It can also be scary to get away from the comfortable of just always asking for cash. Cash is easy, right? Here's how Chirian puts it. He says, you intervene in the process and actually stop and say, no, I don't want your cash. Well, don't actually say that. You understand. I know that's scary, folks. I get it. But this is what you need to do. What this really means is being the donor's helper in this conversation. Notice what you're doing. You have a different role. In this case, you might reject the cash. Why? To help the donor. Hey, here's a smarter way to give. Yes, sometimes that means you're going to take on more administrative hassle or help them work through a donor-advised fund to help the donor. You provide wisdom, you provide guidance and counsel as the donor's guiding sage. And that's how we have wealth conversations to inspire those major gifts of assets.